Udit, what's your weakest signal?
There's a paper that I was reading called Local Targeted Memory Reactivation in Human Sleep. And the idea is basically that we know that smell has the power to bring back memories. And we also know that when you're sleeping, memory gets consolidated, right? You can actually target which memories are consolidated when you're sleeping by releasing scents when you're sleeping. So if you're learning something surrounded with a certain smell, and then that smell is played back to you while you're sleeping, those memories are reactivated. And then you have a better recall for those memories when you're awake. And I'm interested in thinking about this with the other signals that we've talked around a lot in the past, like the self-optimization movement, the growth of the sleep tech industry with weighted blankets, cooling pads, and like all these different wearables that are coming out that are tracking your sleep.
So what about like instead of learning, unlearning or taking away memory or like traumatic memories or painful memories or memories that you don't want?
That's interesting. I wonder if you were doing that while you were doing something like CBT or something. You could actually like improve CBT. I don't know if anyone studied this, like the effect of like aroma for cognitive behavioral therapy.
If what you're saying, like there's this connection between memory formation and olfactory perception, that if you can't smell, it stands to reason that you might just be worse at making memories or consolidating memories.
I mean, the brain rewires itself in different ways too, though. So those pathways I know people who like lose sight and stuff like that, they can like sense hand movements and things like that. And it's not just like air pressure changes in the room, but if you don't have scent anymore, maybe that weight gets linked to something else.
And they have done that, right? They've like remapped like your haptic senses to your taste and things like that. I forget.
Your tongue to sight. The notion of like what even is a memory in this instance, and I know it's like a bigger issue, but it's like this notion that memory is like a series of discrete things stored in the brain. I'm not sure that the researchers would have that position, but like that's how like often we think of it, which is not, as far as I understand it, the way that most like modern research into what memory is, how they think of it. And memory is like always reconstituted anew every time you think of it. So like there's no fixed memory. It's always like a living thing that's reformed. I'm not sure if that has any implications on the notion of like optimizing your memories as you sleep through like triggering environmental cues. But it made me think of like, what are the underlying presumptions of like what memory is inside of the study?
Memory, the way they talk about memory now is that it's like a structure of connections, right? Or like, a way that your neurons are firing in concert with each other. And I don't know if it's making any claims about the underlying nature of how memory is, or like a memory is stored in your brain. All it's talking about is the recall of that memory and the consolidation of that memory.
When I'm trying to retrieve a memory, for me, I have to like pick around the edges of it sometimes. And if I'm trying to remember the contents of a book, let's say, I might try to imagine where I was when I was reading that book. Obviously, think about what the cover looked like, and, things like that. They're not necessarily about the memory I'm trying to retrieve, but they're like adjacent to it. So that eventually, if I do enough of that triangulation, then something of like the thing that I'm looking for kind of comes into view. So having like a smell associated with it is just another like node that you can activate in order to pull the whole thing forward.
It's like a memory palace, right? Like that's the term people use for
it's a memory garden of flowers. It'd be an interesting experiment for like a college kid to do, like have an essential oil to wear when studying each discrete subject, and then like wear it to the exam, where it's like try and like mess with your creativity and like wear them all at once and like go see what kind of connections you can make.
I wonder if there's an implication that like the memory becomes worse when you don't have that scent associated with it. Like what you're doing is almost like something else is probably going wrong in the system, or might be going wrong in the system. So the idea that maybe you're like training yourself to only associate it with a particular smell, and you're even getting worse at it without it or something. What else is happening in that system somewhere else that is unanticipated?
It's almost like immunity to that scent. Like if you overuse it, would you lose that reinforcement ability?
You guys know I've been like studying plants for a long time, and they're a smell machine factory essentially, because their primary way of interacting with each other in the environment is through chemical kind of olfactory scents and things like that, right? They don't have a voice, they can't talk, they don't have that way of communicating. So they communicate through scents. So they attract animals through scents, they repel animals through scents, they pharmacologically manipulate animals through different compounds that also have smells. And so this idea of like us using scents more effectively is almost like us becoming more plant-like, and developing like a cabinet of different like triggering communication systems that are based on scent. I think that idea would be really cool.
The way the whole article was framed was around the value for like productivity, right? The increase in productivity because you can like improve your learning.
Learn while you sleep.
Learn while you sleep.
I've seen this signal or one like it before, but felt like it was not very well like confirmed. Is that right?
Yeah, I looked it up and there were just 30 participants in the study, so that's quite small. But it was weak enough as a signal.
Well, I'm going to go with noise on that note, Macy.
It could be more signal, even just like what Valdis was saying in terms of designing through sense.
Macy says signal, Rob says Pavlovian nonsense. Jer?
As a attempt to explore new avenues for learning and how we learn and how we can learn better, I think it's a signal. Like one of my hopes for this entire period is that given that we're undergoing a sort of disruption of normal events and a lot of the ways that we do things like education have been suspended, that this might be an inflection point where we can head off in a little bit of a different direction. Maybe there's some learnings that we can take from this period forward. And if not, entirely break out, then at least make some movements away from the kind of factory model of education, let's call it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that is this signal, and I guess I'm calling it a signal, is like a small piece of maybe a much larger effort.
Valdis, signal, noise?
I would say a noise in terms of when you asked about effect sizes. I think my kind of like, I don't know, Bayesian baseline for like understanding scientific psychological studies like this has become very disrupted since the replication crisis. And so anytime these kind of like simple model one-to-one things come along, I've become a lot more skeptical, I think, than I was maybe 5-10 years ago. And I just wonder if it's another one of these things that'll succumb to like the failure to replicate elsewhere, given the small sample size and effects and whatnot. So in that regard, I would call it part of the noise of like the scientific institution as it's set up now and what it produces.
In that sense, noise. But there's lots of interesting stuff within the sphere here. Mm-hmm. All right, that's broadcast from later.